Hashtag psychotherapy unfogged with Mark Fielding.
Hello, welcome to hashtag psychotherapy unfogged, series 4, episode 15. Today I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing Renee Magri. Renee is a trained counsellor specialising in pet loss support. Her passion to help and guide grieving pet loss guardians came to her after losing her boxer Buckley to a terminal illness at the young age of 15 and a half. Having always had a keen interest in grief and loss, it was a natural progression for her to take a counselling qualification and direct it to helping the wider community with what can be done, with what can be one of the most difficult losses that many people go through in their lifetime. She is on a mission to normalise pet loss grief. It's never ever just a dog, cat, rabbit, horse, bird, plus all other species. Pets are family, and their love is truly unconditional. Is it any wonder that losing them hurts so much? So really nice to meet you again, Renee. Well, perhaps we could kick off. I ask all our guests just to share a little bit around your personal experiences that led you into the field.
Sure, absolutely. First and foremost, thank you very much for having me. I was delighted to be invited, so thank you so much. Yeah, my personal experience. Well, I lost, as you mentioned, my beautiful boxer Buckley, and he was just 5.5 when he passed away. So it all happened very out of the blue. And like many animal lovers, we have a really close connection with them, and of course, I did with him. So yeah, his diagnosis was, as I said, very much out of the blue. And when he passed away, the grief was huge for me. It was something that I've never experienced before. And I knew I wasn't the only one to feel this strong sense of loss. And hence where I stepped into supporting pet loss guardians with what they're going through as well.
And just to kind of ask a follow-up around Buckley. So from what I kind of read on your LinkedIn profile, Buckley was quite ill, but Buckley was terminally ill for a while. And of course, that, I guess, brings a different layer, really. I mean, just as much as you're happy to talk about, I mean, what was that period like dealing with the terminal illness with Buckley?
Yeah, sure. Well, Buckley became terminally ill very suddenly. So
Yeah.
basically, he was unwell for a couple of days, and then boom, we were given a terminal prognosis. And at that time of diagnosis, he was only 3 years and 10 months. So I was like, what was going on here?
Yeah.
So I didn't know it at the time. I do now, but I didn't know at the time, but I immediately stepped into what is called anticipatory grief,
Yeah.
which is grieving a loss before it's happened. And I was, feeling all the feels and knew, of course, I was upset and concerned. And Buckley being terminal, he was given 6 to 12 months. We actually had 20 months with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, feeling all those feels and not knowing exactly what it was. So when he had an okay day, so did I.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, when his days weren't that good, of course, emotionally, yeah, I felt it too. So it was very overwhelming, Mark, very overwhelming. And then not knowing, you're given a prognosis, and of course that's a guide, and that anticipation of, when am I going to have to make end of life decisions? What am I going to do? How am I going to cope with this?
Yeah.
How am I going to do life without Buckley by my side? And so I was feeling a lot of those things, which is very hard to sit with.
Yeah, and I guess the palliative care aspect, I guess it's because Buckley, I guess, doesn't understand. I mean, I guess with a human, with a human that has a terminal illness and is in hospice or palliative care, I guess there can be kind of, can be communication through words. But I guess with Buckley, I guess Buckley doesn't really understand what's going on, I guess, which makes it all the more complicated for both of you, really.
Yeah, that was really hard. And there was parts of, a lot of the time were some things I guess I wanted him to know and other things I didn't. I found the actual euthanasia, the day of his euthanasia, we had a home euthanasia. I felt, of course, an immense amount of sadness, but there was a side of me that I couldn't tell him what was happening, but another side is that I didn't want him to know at the same time. Animals are very stoic, and they do very much live in the moment.
Yeah.
And if I can share with your listeners, is that that might be something that could help, that they are very much in the present moment, and they trust us to make these decisions for them. And we're on reflection back to the euthanasia, which I still 6.5 years later think about quite regularly. There's things like this that I sit with to help process those end of life decisions, because that it is a very, very difficult thing to do, even despite having our vet team, our vet support team, quality of life scales. There's a whole lot of things that bring us to that decision. But no matter what, it's never a right time. It's never the right day. We never want to lose them. And it's hard. It's really, really hard for us to make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've had similar experiences with kind of a dog and a cat myself, and it is incredibly hard. Do you think it's misunderstood? I mean, it working with lots of clients that really experience the unique loss of of an animal, of a friend. Do you think maybe it's misunderstood often? If someone is in deep kind of loss over a pet, that perhaps people around them might misunderstand, might think perhaps the grief is wrong in some way, or
yeah, absolutely. Pet loss grief can be very much disenfranchised, and essentially that means not getting the recognition that it so truly deserves. It can be, it's just a dog, it's just a cat, it's a bird, you can get another one. So the acknowledgement and validation for pet loss guardians is not as strong as what I'd like it to be. But in saying that, there are many people that do acknowledge and validate pet loss, and it is growing. And I think the more conversations we can have, the more education we can put out there to not only pet loss guardians with their own grief, but their family, their friends, the community, to let everyone know pet loss grief is real grief. It's profound. People are going through a very, very hard loss, and I've had said to me many, many times over the years, Renee, I've lost insert human family member who I love dearly with all my heart, but I've lost, the loss of animal friend's name has hit me on a level that it's past a 10. And, I've experienced that myself. I relate so much. And one of the main reasons for that is our love bond and connection is so strong with them. So my own thoughts only, of course, but strong love, strong grief, and grief surrounds many types of loss in our life. Not only the loss of a beloved, but when we're talking about grief with a loved one, to me, it's not about the species. It's about that, whether it's human or animal, it's about that love bond and connection. So I look at it, it makes perfectly sense to me why the grief can be so, so strong.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. And I guess, arguably, the relationship with I mean, I don't even want to use the word pet really, because I mean, these are friends, aren't they? I mean, the relationship with a kind of pet friend, is very, very unique. I mean, it's very, very unique. And so I'm wondering around the stages of grief. And I mean, I guess everyone is going to grieve differently, depending on, lots and lots of factors, who they are. But I mean, in terms of the stages of grief, I mean, how would you say, do they differ, do you think, in any way from grief over, I don't know, a kind of human family member?
Well, the stages of grief, we know about about them from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and
Yeah.
don't quote me, but all of them, the anger denial.
Yeah.
I can't read all that. Yeah, we know them, but that's
Yeah.
really expanded. So whilst they still very much, for a lot of people have a place, in terms of pet loss grief, I would say I guess the top things that I hear in terms of the grief space, of course, immense sadness is a huge one.
Yeah.
Loneliness is also very big as well, because that unconditional love that we have with them. Sometimes our animals are there more than some humans, and that's the reality.
Yeah.
They're there in good times, not so good times.
Yeah.
They're our support system through our own personal challenges. So loneliness is a big one. Within pet loss grief too, guilt is another huge one. The what ifs, if onlys, couldas, shouldas. So that's very, very big within there as well. So they would probably be I'm going to say main ones, but everybody grieves so uniquely, Mark.
Yeah,
so
true.
what one person feels can be different. Grief can also ebb and flow. We could feel immense guilt one day, but then on any given day when, we're in a different sort of space with our grief saying different things, that could shift a bit. So, and back and forth. So it's, grief it's very unique. There's no time limits to it. There's no rush. It's really my whole way to grieve is your way. And, there's no rules and there's no instructions with it. And it's essentially, you like to approach it as, we're carrying our grief with us, and it's within us now. And something that is said quite a lot within pet loss grief is, when are you going to get over it? Aren't you going to move on by now?
Yeah.
Just go and get another one.
Yeah.
I get quite flinchy when I hear those things, because we're never going to be okay with what's happened. And we're not going to wake up one day and go, oh, okay, let's move on. To me, we don't move on.
Yeah.
We learn how to live with that heartbreak. We work on ways on how to integrate the loss into our life. And there's many ways we can explore that. But that is one thing I thought I'd mention, that's very much said in the animal world, which can be very hurtful for pet loss guardians when they hear, just go get another one.
Yeah, and it really diminishes the relationship, doesn't it? I mean, I get and that is really, really common, isn't it? I guess people, I don't know, people that don't understand. I think, I would say probably only people that have been through it perhaps understand, really. I think it's maybe difficult for people that, have not kind of been friends with pets to understand the absolute deep bond, that can grow, between both. I mean, in terms of the guilt, Renee, I mean, what kind of things do people tend to be guilty for? I mean, I guess it's all very individual, but what kind of things? How does the guilt come up?
Yeah, that's variable too, depending on, because everybody's grief journey is different.
Yeah.
But normally the narrative will start with something like the what if I, for example, what if I did that extra test? Maybe they could have found something else. Maybe I should have picked up on the signs sooner. Did I miss something? Maybe I could have taken them to the vet sooner. I should have. That's normally the narrative of what if only I coulda, I shoulda. And most of the time I call within our grief, we have different layers. I like to refer to the different emotion as layers. And within this particular layer, it's a strong one. I would say I really want to normalize these feelings. I want to normalize pet loss grief and acknowledge it as a collective, but I really want to normalize these sorts of feelings too, because sometimes we can feel bad for feeling things and we can think rationally and they're not. But yeah, those, I would say with particularly guilt, 99% of pet loss guardians feel it on different levels. It can be a very difficult layer to navigate because it's so strong. But I really like to listen and witness what it's saying, acknowledge what the guilt is saying, and listen to what it's saying. And when we start to do that, we can start to unpack it more. But I could talk about this layer for a very long time, but I guess essentially a couple of things that might be helpful is we normally are believers in cause and effect. So when something goes wrong, we want to know why. And what normally happens is our mind takes us on a search with a lot of questions in there. And this is where that narrative of what if I, if only. So we're on this repetitive search. The interesting thing is we don't a lot of the time normally find the answers that we're looking for. However, we normally keep searching in the hope that we do. So most of the time it's the grief talking, and we've got to try to work a bit closer with this layer to try to open up avenues to get the grief to see that. But two sort of main parts just to add is that I really like to work on no intent to cause any harm at all.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a really pinnacle way to start to explore this layer more. So we never, ever, ever intend to go out to harm the ones we love. So we do the best in the situation that we're in with the information that we had at the time. And there's going to be, lots of variables there. So it's really important, I think, to let the grief know that. Yeah, just let it know no intent. So that's one part. The other part is the hindsight bias, which hindsight's a very biased thing, and it has a lot of that counterfactual thinking in there, that what if I, if only. So a lot of the time, what often happens is information that we have in the after, if we put that information into the before, that changes things. If we knew things in the after that we didn't know in the before, we might have done something different. But that doesn't give you that 100% guarantee that the outcome would have been any different.
No.
So there's a lot to discuss, particularly with guilt, but there can be a lot of ambiguity. The other thing I do like to try to work on with this is it true guilt or is it more regret?
Yeah. I mean, how would you distinguish the difference?
Well, they're both hard emotions to feel. So I would say with guilt, interestingly enough, somebody that is truly guilty doesn't normally feel that guilty because they intend to go and harm somebody or something.
Yeah.
With guilt, if you had like a courtroom set up where you had a judge and a jury and you're on the stand and you're the jury and there's evidence, to create to create a pool of evidence to show that you're truly guilty within this space, it's hard to get a lot because there's never any intent there. So, guilt, true guilt, there's that intention. So regret, still has emotions of sadness and disappointment and feeling helpless, possibly. There's a lot of despair. There's a lot of that sits in that space. But with regret, there's not normally any intent there. And it really I find when we explore this more and we work towards making what I call some peace with this guilt layer. You might always feel guilt on some level, and we have permission to feel it. I'm certainly not sitting here saying don't feel it. if anything, I'm the opposite. Let's welcome it in and give it a voice.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I really think that's probably a pretty, I'm hoping a pretty good snapshot for your listeners to hopefully take away and process that a bit more, because that's often a really good starting point to work with this layer and to work towards making some peace with it. But we can go a few rounds with it, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I
Few rounds
really,
with it.
yeah, I mean, so much in what you say. I mean, just to pick up on a couple of things. Yeah, I mean, the hindsight, I think that is so true, isn't it? I think it's so
Yeah.
easy. I think we probably don't even do it consciously to put the knowledge that we have now, put us back in the position we were, before the death, and then feel regret. I mean, I mean, that I think is really common. And I really love the idea around giving the guilt a voice. Goodness me, that must be so powerful in the room sometimes with clients. And
Oh, absolutely.
are there other strategies you might use? I mean, it's obviously completely client led, but what other strategies might you
Yeah.
use with people in the counselling room?
Yeah, look, there's lots of different things. It's really important to me that I listen very closely to what somebody's experiencing, because
Yeah,
no grief journey is the same. It is not a one size fits all.
no,
And if there was, Mark, if there was a list of instructions that I could give to everybody, I would 100%. We can't do that. And yet, the thing that we can do is, as you said, we can, we can really guide it and support it and work on ways on how
yeah,
to carry it. I think it's really, and again, my own thoughts, we can't fix this. We can't fix grief. I don't feel that we can, because my own thoughts, for me to fix my grief with Buckley, I'd have to have him back by my side. And
yeah,
unfortunately,
for
that's not
sure.
going to happen. But I do want to, share hope to your listeners that there are definitely ways, which I'll share a couple very soon, on how we can carry it and
Yeah,
learn how to have it there, because not only emotionally, but we can actually feel grief physically as well. And that's something to be aware of. And I know for myself, particularly with my emotional spaces at the top of my stomach, I can feel emotion. Some people in the backs of the necks, so that's just good to be aware of as well.
yeah.
But I would have to say, I've got a couple of things here, because there's so many, but I would say primarily acknowledging your loss,
Mm.
acknowledging your grief, and as you mentioned before, giving it that voice.
Yeah,
Um, that's going to be it. I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying it's easy to talk about, because it's profound. So it's going to hurt, but that's really beneficial. Grief likes movement,
mm,
and grief likes to be witnessed. And so acknowledging the loss. Couple of other ideas and suggestions is, with keeping that grief moving, is releasing that grief into a space that you feel that your loss is acknowledged and validated. Uh, and when we start to do that and unpack it more, we start to really get to the inner core of what these layers are saying. So would you like, I've got a couple of suggestions for that. Did you want me
oh
to
yeah,
maybe
please,
share a couple of
please
ideas?
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Wonderful. Now, just a couple of different things, because some things resonate more with some people than others, and
yeah,
that's what I very much like to do is try to bring in different things that people can try, and essentially forming some practices around your grief and hugging it very tight. So I really like writing out my thoughts, and that's something that can really be brought into pet loss
yeah,
grief.
yeah,
So whether that's in a grief journal, and it doesn't have to be all super structured, it can be, but even just a few words. Couple that with some allocated grief time. Maybe get up 20 minutes earlier with a coffee. Just write a few thoughts down. If writing's not for you, another idea is just to record a few words into your phone,
yeah,
just talking about it. Listen, play it back, listen to what your grief's saying, so that expression, taking your grief out on a walk. I love nature.
yeah.
doesn't cost anything. If you can take your emotions out and grief on a walk, that's a really, I walk about 4 or 5 times a week, and when I don't, I really notice the difference.
Yeah.
So it's the open air
Yeah. Yeah. I
can
mean, yeah,
really
totally agree. Yeah.
have a good space. So
Yeah.
if you do that, so that's another good idea. Creating rituals can be
Yeah,
really
that was,
beneficial with
yeah.
pet
So
loss grief.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. I mean, yeah, say a bit more about the use of ritual.
Yeah, rituals are wonderful, and I've got so many of them that I still use to this day and will
Mm,
for the rest of my life, I think. Just to explain, like the difference between a routine and a ritual.
yeah.
A routine is more like, say, on your daily, taking one step in front of the other to the next part of your day. You
Mm,
know, you get up, you make your coffee, then whatnot, and get into your day. A ritual more is a space where it has an intention behind it of some sort. And that intention, when we're talking about pet loss grief, the ritual, and I look at the intention behind that, is to acknowledge your grief and all of the things that I just mentioned. But the other space I really like to embrace so much within pet loss grief is continuing the relationship.
yeah.
I really, really love to embrace that. Love doesn't die. That relationship continues, and rituals are such a support within that space. So much change happens within loss, so much change. And that's a whole another topic, but what doesn't change is your love bond and connection.
No.
No one or nothing can take that away from you ever. So let's just pick it up and carry it with us. So rituals are fantastic for that. A couple of really easy things. I'll share just things that I do. I
Yeah.
love aromatherapy, so I'll always have an oil burner going. I love lavender oil. That's something I use on the daily. Another good thing, and this is great for continuing relationships, send your beloved some love, to just light a little, like even just a little tea light candle,
Yeah.
and just take 2 minutes, just 2 minutes to really stop, breathe, ground yourself to where you are, use your breath, and just send them love, whether that's internally, externally, or both. Really channel into that. Another ritual that is, or it could be used as a ritual, is writing to your forever friend. Write them a letter,
Yeah.
record some words to them, similar to the journaling idea. Writing the letters, I've had some beautiful feedback with that. So
Goodness
that's
me, that
another
must be,
idea.
yeah, just in terms of the writing, wow, I mean, that must evoke so much from people. I mean, writing a letter, to their friend that's passed, writing a journal. I mean, for some people, goodness me, that must
Yeah,
be so powerful, I would imagine. Will
it's
some of the clients,
powerful. Yeah.
yeah, will some of the clients maybe share? I mean, I guess they don't have to, but will they maybe share with you sometimes things that if they write a letter, for instance, would sometimes clients maybe read it to
Yeah.
you? Yeah,
Sometimes, yes, sometimes they do. They often share sometimes with writing the letter, it's not something that everyone's able to do right away.
no,
Sometimes it's the idea I like to share, and I plant that idea and let it sit within them. And sometimes it could take a little while if somebody's wanting to try that. But when they do, they are so glad that they have. And of course, it's emotion. They're tears of love, as I call them.
yeah, of course,
Strong
yeah,
love, strong grief, tears of love. And I always say all emotions are allowed. And I always take a box of tissues with me. If I need them, I need them. If I don't, I don't. But the thing with the letter, it can be taken to, like, we can write the letter itself. We can then take the letter, and then we might want to go to their resting place, whether they're cremated or buried. We might want
yeah,
to read it out to them. We might just want to place the letter where they rest, just
yeah,
leave it with them. So there's many variables, and these are the sorts of practices and rituals, especially for the long term, time, but especially immediately after the loss, because your world's been turned upside down, and it can actually bring in some solace and calm in amongst everything that's going on. It's something that you've got control over, you've got to say. So the rituals, I feel, something that are just so beneficial. Together with the grief, many grief practices. I gave a few ideas before, but I always say, Mark, and it's trial and error. But I really encourage people to give things a go. And when they find something that they connect with, keep doing it. Keep doing it at your pace. And I would never, ever rush off. I never would say to anyone, you have to do this. And no, it's your grief, and everyone has the right to grieve their way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I guess, I guess this is a snapshot of all of the things, I guess, in your toolbox as a counsellor. And as you say, grief is so individual. And I guess for each client, different things are going to be useful. I mean, I'm just repeating what I said earlier. I mean, goodness me, when you're in a room with somebody that has experienced, pet loss, I mean, goodness me, I mean, it must be so powerful, Renee. I mean, how do you keep yourself kind of, well, I don't know, how do you retain, your own mental health, I guess, really, because, I mean, you're sitting with people and death is in the room. I mean, this is what you do. I mean, how do you keep yourself well, really? Because, I mean, the impact on you in the room must be enormous sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And thank you for asking that question. Look, I am not going to lie. It can be hard, and the sessions themselves obviously are full with a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
And I really, really channel into creating a safe space for my client, pet loss guardian, that's going through this. Just let them know they are safe, and try to make them feel very comfortable that, as I mentioned before, all emotions are allowed.
Yeah.
Yes, I will honestly say to you, some of the things that are shared with me are very, really upsetting. And I feel so much for what they're going through.
Absolutely.
I see people in absolute despair. I'm pleased that I can provide this space for them, because sometimes, a lot of people are very supportive, but the reality is sometimes people aren't. And I am privileged, and I'm actually grateful that I can give them this space they can be 100% authentically themselves, and be listened to, be heard, and give their feelings a voice. So, myself, my own mental health, I like to just be very aware of when I need some time out, when I need, to take care of me. So I'm very, very aware of that. And I find for myself, going on those walks, taking my headspace outside, and just something about the outdoors. So I am quite aware of that. But it's I feel so much for people, and I just want to have more conversations about pet loss grief, to let people know that it's real grief. It's real. It's real.
I mean, absolutely. And I have to say, just kind of personally, I really, really have a lot of admiration for counsellors that work, predominantly in grief, because it's such an important space, I think, for people that are grieving, and I think the ability to contain and to be with someone, when they are grieving, I think it's a really unique quality, and I think that the space that you provide to people, especially not because I guess it is a very, very unique and misunderstood form of grief. So I guess if somebody is in a family system, perhaps where other people are are maybe a bit more dismissive, I guess the relationship with you and your ability to really, really allow them to open up around their pain, I mean, it must be absolutely invaluable. I mean, I wanted to pick up on some of the other things you do. You run a kind of pet loss support group and a Facebook page. Could you maybe say a little bit about that, Renee? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for all that you said too. I really appreciate you sharing that and acknowledging that. Yes, I'd love to talk more about that. I think community is such a good thing. A like-minded community
Yeah,
can be
for sure.
so helpful for lots of different things, but for pet loss, being with a like-minded community can just be so beneficial. So about 4 months after Buckley died, I decided to create a online pet loss support group through Facebook,
Fabulous.
and
Yeah.
that's grown, over the years. And the community that we have there is just so beautiful. It's a different, of course, it's a different platform to a private session, but it still absolutely creates that safe, calm, non-judgmental space where pet loss guardians can be. So I had two, I guess, visions when I created the group. One was a side where pet loss guardians can come to share their story if they wanted to. They could, post and have that like-minded community. And
Yeah.
when people really get it, and I say that in inverted commas. So that was one part. The other side, I really wanted to bring in as much as I could, because there's only one of me, but I do as much as I can. But to bring in some learning, to bring in some education about pet loss grief, to talk about things like guilt, to give some, tips and those sorts of things as takeaways that could be helpful in a group setting. So that was the other vision, which still very much is going, and very much happening to this day. So yeah, it's grown. It's a sad reason that normally people come to the group, but it's also a good thing to know that there is support there. And no, I don't want anyone to feel alone with such a, at all. But, very much with a profound loss, because, the feelings of grief can be extremely overwhelming. And
Absolutely.
yeah, that's just, so yeah, there's that. And of course, my social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn,
Yeah.
that I'm, very much active in, and almost daily. I've got quite
Great.
a few platforms that they're all managed by myself, so I bring as much support
Great.
into there as well. I also do a few live posts in my groups as well when I can. So yeah, I definitely put as much as I can into all of them.
Phil, and for our listeners, we'll put all of your kind of social media links, on our social media platforms, and along with the podcast. And just to pick up on what you were saying about community, I mean, goodness me, that must be so important to people. I mean, sitting and sharing experience in group, and having a kind of supportive community that understands and validates. Wow, that must be so important for people. I mean, it's a fantastic service that you offer. I mean, I always feel that pet loss is something that is really, really underrepresented in counselling. And if people want to get hold of you, if people want to get hold of you for one-to-one counselling, how do they do it? How do they get hold of you?
Yeah, sure. Through my website is probably the easiest way.
Yeah,
There's a contact tab on my website. So if you go through there, that's the easiest way. Of course, through my Facebook page and Instagram and LinkedIn, there's messaging there as well. But probably through my website would be the easiest way.
fantastic. And I always ask our guests at the end of the show their favourite kind of go-to coping strategies to sustain good mental health. What are yours? What do you do to sustain your, good mental health?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. Absolutely what I said before, the walking, the movement. I just find
Yeah,
movement, because walking again is not for everybody. So just moving your body, my body, and even if that's jumping up and down for a couple of minutes, I do that.
yeah,
Um, I make sure, in terms of sort of self-care, I make sure that I'm aware when I'm needing that break. Like,
yeah,
I'll stop, recharge, whether it's just going and getting coffee from a local cafe, reading a few pages of my book.
yeah,
So, and just being in tune with my thoughts, like I'm aware, if my anxiety levels are getting high,
yeah.
the sorts of things I can do to help me. So it's, I guess, a lot of the things that many people use, focusing on my breath. Always, I must say, Mark, one of my biggest things these days, which I've really channeled into, is just really acknowledging my thought, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
And if it's anxiety, I will literally stop and say, stop. This is anxiety I'm feeling right now, and what does it want to say? So that's probably one of my biggest things, I must say, in amongst everything. And I find when I really do that, that can really help to process things. So I guess there's a lot of variables there, but I'm everything from going to a walk to meditations are great. I love them. All of that stuff I really like to do, and grief really likes all of that too. And the thing with grief is that it's often very responsive to guidance and direction, and it's learning on those ways, because I quickly just add this bit in, that grief might feel, because it's so strong, that it really wants to hurt you and harm you, because it feels not nice and it's uncomfortable. Whereas I actually like to really reframe that and look at it in the senses, I don't think its intention is that it wants to harm us. I just think it needs that guidance and direction, because I go back to what I said earlier on, strong love, strong grief.
Yeah.
So that grief that's hurting you is that love that is so strong.
Yeah.
So that's something that maybe I'm hoping that will resonate, and that's what reframing, and that's another big thing. I like to look at something, and if we can maybe look at it from the outside looking in, or what would you say to a good friend of yours that was feeling that way? Often we can come up with some really good reframes there. So that's still a little something there too.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I guess the being in nature, the going for walks, I mean, that's something I talk a lot about on the show. I mean, for a lot of people, I think that is fantastic. If you can be in nature, you're walking, you can be mindful, and it's so therapeutic, isn't it? I mean, I could literally talk to you for another 45 minutes, Renee. And as always, I've not covered all of the questions I wrote down, but this is going to be a really, really interesting listen, for all of our listeners. And I'm so glad we've been able to have you on. I mean, just before we finish, is there anything you would like to say that I've not given you the opportunity to?
Oh my goodness! Like you just said, I could talk about things for a long time. Maybe
it's a big area, isn't it?
Well, we could do an episode. We could do an episode 2 down the track sometime. But look, they say that just what you were saying then about being outside and things like that. I'm just going to add on the senses. What you see, smell, touch, and hear can be really, very, very helpful too. Within grief. Look, there's so much that I could say, but I just want, I think I might finish on, I just want pet loss guardians to know that they are not alone, and there is support out there. And please, please, please don't think anything that you are thinking is crazy, silly, or stupid, because I hear that a lot within the session space. It'll start off, Renee, you might think I'm crazy or silly, and the first thing I always say is no. So I just really want to emphasize nothing is silly or crazy or stupid. You've experienced a profound loss, and you're not alone, and support in many forms, whether that's with me or other support out there. Please know that you are not alone, and reach out. Someone will listen and be there for you. So I really want to emphasize that to all your listeners.
Thank you. And that's a really, really nice message. And, I absolutely concur. I mean, relationships with our kind of friends from the animal world, I mean, they are unconditional love. They're very, very unique relationships, aren't they? So, it's really important work that you do. But we'll finish there. Thank you so much for coming on. And it's been really nice to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Once again, I'd like to really thank Renee for coming on the show. It's the pet loss grief is an area that I think is really underrepresented in counselling. Things that we could have talked about, things that I wrote down. Obviously, we ran out of time, and it is, loss and pet loss is such a big subject I could have asked Renee around, children and working with kind of children and their grief over pet loss. And also a little more really about the trauma aspect, because I think there can be a trauma aspect. I mean, having a pet that has to have palliative care, I mean, that in itself, I think, is incredibly difficult. The pet doesn't understand what's going on, and watching, someone that you love becoming weaker and weaker, and knowing that, there's an anticipation of death coming, as Renee put it, anticipatory grief. I think that in itself, I think, is incredibly difficult. I think being with, a loved animal at the end, when perhaps they're, being euthanized, I think can be very, very traumatic. I think some of those images of a pet passing away, are tremendously powerful, and I think stay in the mind probably forever. I mean, as I said during the episode, I do really admire, I think, counsellors that work predominantly with grief and loss. Such powerful primal feelings in the room, and I guess creating the space and being able to contain the grief and the extreme feelings of loss of a relationship that was unconditionally loving, a relationship, I mean, I would argue, like no other. I mean, I've just take one potential, pet, a relationship with a dog. It's possibly the most unconditional loving relationship I think anyone will ever have, and obviously when that relationship ends, the grief really kind of matches that. I mean, Renee must experience such strong, powerful feelings when she's in the room. It really, really is a unique kind of grief, I think. And often, I think, as Renee said in the show, often one that is really, really misunderstood. I think others, other people, maybe people that have not experienced pet loss themselves, I think it's very easy for them to diminish it. I mean, what Renee was saying around, the kind of narratives, oh, we'll just get another one, really, really, I think diminishes, the bond that people have. And also Renee mentioned loneliness. I mean, sometimes older people who are widowed, widower, who are on their own, will have a dog, will have a cat, and that is great company. It's a loving relationship. And obviously the feelings of loss when, that loved animal, that loved friend dies are absolutely immense and can lead to extreme feelings of loneliness. People walking around the house and just feeling, a real empty space, where their kind of pet friend used to be. And very, very uncomplicated relationships. I mean, obviously, unconditional love is possible between humans, of course, but but I guess with a pet, there is no real conflict, really. There's no disagreement, no conflict to manage. It is in that respect, I think, a really, really unique kind of bond, really. Renee talking about groups, I would imagine, the groups, and please look on our website, on our social media platforms for all of Renee's social media links. I think the groups, the Facebook group, I think must be so helpful for people. I think because I think pet loss can be so misunderstood. I think being able to sit within a group, to access a group, of people who really understand and will really validate and empathize with the feelings, I think is really, really invaluable. It must be so very helpful, I think, for people that have experienced, pet loss. Such a broad subject. I mean, other things I could have asked. I could have asked about, different people. Some people, I think, have a lot of loss in their lives, and often, losses tend to join up. So, a pet loss can, traumatic enough, can sit on the top of, other losses of partners, losses of all sorts of losses, family members, which makes the grief, I think, even more complex, really. I mean, some of the strategies I think Renee uses, I thought were really fantastic. I mean, the writing a letter, the journaling, and also something that I guess Renee didn't say explicitly, but I really kind of got from the interview and the way she talked, is kind of externalizing and maybe also almost personifying some of the feelings that come up, like grief. What's the grief saying? You know, where is the grief? What's the grief? I mean, going for a walk with the grief. I think that can also be tremendously helpful, just putting some space around some of these terribly strong emotions. I mean, guilt would be another one. I mean, I think guilt is incredibly common in all kinds of loss, really. You know, and guilt, I think, without the space to try and process it and reality test it, I think can be traumatizing. And it really does fit into a loss model. I mean, people often feel kind of grief and guilt around loss. You know, and that also associates to something else that Renee was saying around, it's very easy when you're sitting in a position afterwards with hindsight, that you can almost project yourself back with that hindsight and feel that you've not done things correctly, you know, things that you would have done with the knowledge that you have in the present. And I think that is so true in all kinds of loss, really, and other domains as well. So perhaps at some stage we'll have Renee back on the show. I hope our listeners really enjoyed that one. I thought it was a really, really interesting and rich interview. And we have a few more episodes coming up soon. Tomorrow, Joe will be back as host. I may be joining him, I may not. I'm not entirely sure at this point, interviewing Jack Binstead, actor and comedian. And on Friday, I will be interviewing doing an interview around binge eating disorder with Rochelle Craig. She's a counsellor that works in that area and extremely experienced and knowledgeable. That should be a really, really good one. I've actually done some of Rochelle's training in the area, so really looking forward to both. So as always, you know, look after yourselves, look after each other, and look after the planet. And I'll see you on the next episode.